Michael Cairns from Affordable Housing Australia. My question is, from an institutional investor's point of view, they're interested, of course, if your organisation goes belly up, then how can it sell the asset? So if you've got a specialised disabled housing project, then how easy is it to convert that property to a standard market property without any reduction in value?
Yeah, good question. Part of our early planning was, obviously our site is in private title. Part of the planning around the precinct and buildings was creating a sort of lease plan that's underneath it that we could subdivide in the event of the worst case scenario. So we tried to design and develop buildings that met our needs, but also would be suitable for the normal market. So we actually partnered with NAB to finance it, and we've actually already carved out the retirement stock as a clear parcel of land that could be sold off, and then the residential stock. But ultimately, our organisation is asset rich and cash poor, so it wasn't really much of an issue for the banks, investors to get on board. It was more a risk profile for ourselves, that what happens in the future. And at that point, NDIS wasn't around, so we still don't know what the future is going to hold. So as a risk profile for us, that was essential as part of the planning, that we had that mechanism within the master planning, but also the built form, that we could subdivide it and sell it off in the future if need be.
Hello, Amanda from Disability ACT. This is a question for Astrid. Astrid, I'm interested, and you may feel that you don't want to share this information, the approximate cost difference in the, I think it was 6 or 8 units in the Melbourne building, that the difference between building the regular apartments that didn't have the wider doorways and the awesome technology, and the cost of the additional technology, approximately.
Okay. I suppose the issue with the Melbourne development was it was retrofit, part retrofit, so the costs are probably not a good guide. And what we're also finding is that, particularly around the technology, that people quoting are finding it difficult to do. So we're still working on that, and it's probably not helpful to talk about some of the pricing, because it's not. Yeah, it's going to take a few projects to get a good grip around that, and to look at, well, I suppose one thing is technology keeps changing as well, and we're learning how to specify our needs. So there's an interface between us getting it right as well as what's out there. So it's probably not helpful to talk around pricing on the early technology.
I did actually have a slide that had an economic appraisal, but I thought I'd take it out. For 2 reasons. One, I don't really have a great understanding of what the development cost for affordable housing actually is, but the feedback I've had for a traditional residential single dwelling is round about the $1,100 a square metre in South Australia. For apartments, towards the 15 and 16, maybe 1,800 a square metre. Our cost to build is nearly double that, including landscaping and furniture, so it's not apples for apples, and that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't include it. But it's not cheap. It's not a cheap exercise, and there has to be a mechanism to bridge that gap somehow.
Sean Kelly from Housing. It's probably a question to all of the speakers today, but perhaps if you could, there's a room full of service providers here who are willing to be partners in things like this, and I guess if you could maybe give some lessons or some learnings about how you make a partnership work.
Be very clear about what the outcome is that you need to achieve, I think is the first thing. It was interesting in the project we had to really make decisions on in a very short time frame. That was almost a blessing, because every time, so we've got 48 hours to make this decision, so it just does the call on you every time. And it actually strengthened the partnership in a way, because we knew that if we couldn't make decisions quickly and find processes through issues quickly, we were jeopardising a project. So I suppose some of the elements are actually really understanding where the other person's coming from and what they need to get out of this project, so that you can understand what it's going to take to enable them to stay in it, so that it's not just your outcomes, but it's actually the outcomes both of you need, and the degree to which you're prepared to make compromises to deliver the outcome compared to getting 100% of what's appropriate for you. I think, as we know with all partnerships, it's about trust, respect, openness, willing to do the hard talking when you need to. And probably the other thing we really learnt on that one, again in the short time frame, is sharing the expertise across the collaborative parties. For example, I'd only just started with the organisation. We didn't have much of a spec for the design, so we worked very much with TAC's design. However, I had quite a strong background in support models and quality practice and those sort of things. So we were able to share, in a sense, our strengths and contribute collaboratively to the outcome. So, yeah, the whole was far more than individual parts.
Hi, Tim Arkley-Smith from Housing ACT. I was just, Roddy talked about the exploration by design process and the period of time that it took to get pen to paper before you started drawing. Can you just explain a bit about that and the significance of needing that lead-in time?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a number of things that you need to consider. One, having the appropriate professionals to really lead the design. In our case, they didn't have experience in disability accommodation, but they were experts in residential accommodation, so they could drive the efficiencies in the build. And we were then able to supplement their lack of knowledge by our operational environments. The volunteering solution was just excellent. The value to any project is up front through the planning design phase. As soon as you get halfway through design, you lose the opportunity to add value, and as soon as you start construction, it costs you more. So we spent almost a year in planning and a year in design before we started building, and whilst our stakeholders and board got agitated with the length of time, when you look back now, the value that we got through that process is really paying dividends. But it's setting up a process. We had a gateway review process that we reviewed every 3 months. We had a whole point, we had the board, we had all the key stakeholders on board just to look at where the scope was, where the solution was at, where the dollars were, before we then moved on. So we had that kind of progressive audit in place to make sure that we were on the right track and that everyone involved in the project was on the same understanding.
Look, thank you very much. I'd like you all to send a warm thank you to both Roddy and Astrid for their presentations. Just in terms of conclusion of today, I just wanted to thank all the speakers that have given their time to be here today, but also you as audience members. You don't have much of a symposium or a discussion without people turning up with open minds and good questions and a willingness to engage. So thank you very much for coming today, and for those that have attended previous sessions. From our perspective, we hope that this series of events has been useful to you and your organisations in hopefully in multiple ways. I'd like to briefly summarise where we've got to as a result of today's event and the series. The Disability Housing Symposium series has brought together interested and diverse stakeholders with a range of expertise to begin the important conversations that's needed in this formative stage of the NDIS. Obviously, to achieve the social objectives of the NDIS the opportunity to transform people's lives, we're going to need a proactive response from the housing sector, and many people in this room will play an important role in that process. Achieving the mixture of safety, appropriateness, design, property amenity, security and individual support from the right mix of service providers will require all stakeholders to be involved in the designing of the right housing choices to meet the housing needs and aspirations of people with a disability. This is certainly new territory for the housing sector, notwithstanding the fact that much good work has already happened, but we need to move from traditional designs of built form to thinking about need, use and changing use over time. The innovation needs to think beyond just different housing products and think about that clear relationship with service delivery and adaptability. Already we've started to see some positive results from this symposium series. I mentioned earlier on that the Real Estate Institute through Ron Bell have commenced discussions with us around making private rental accommodation more accessible through our central access point at Nature Conservation House. I also hope that out of these conversations that you've connected with people that you can continue conversations with and continue to partner. We'll certainly be informed by both the presentations that have been made in these series, but also the questions that have been asked to think about how we can continue the conversation. I'd like to remind all service providers that there is sector development support available through the Community Sector Reform Program or the NDIS transitional arrangements. That is about enabling service providers to think about what the NDIS means for them, how they can think about their role in the NDIS and what partnerships and relationships and services might come from that. As a final element of this symposium, we'd like your advice on any extra information, training or educational supports that might be required to assist providers to enter into the affordable housing space or to enhance the delivery of housing services in the NDIS context. So the last thing I'll ask you to do today, if you can, is to fill out the yellow form. Do you want to model it for me? There it is, which is a brief sector development survey which will allow us to help target future development activities. And there's a box on the way out of the room if you're happy to submit that on the way through. I'd really appreciate that. So again, in conclusion, thank you for coming. Thank you for your energy involvement. Thanks for all of our speakers. And I wish you well as we go forward into this brave new world of opportunities for people with a disability. Thank you very much.